We look for the wood, the pitch, the water, the arc.
But what if the ship isn't a boat? Like, what if it's actually a social algorithm?
Welcome to the deep dive. For centuries, humanity has taken one of the most terrifying, structurally complex sociological warnings ever recorded, and we've slowly, systematically turned it into a nursery rhyme.
Yeah, a literal children's story.
Exactly. We paint it on the walls of children's bedrooms. We picture a guy with a flowing white beard, this giant wooden boat, and animals just marching up a ramp 2 by 2.
Right, the giraffes poking their heads out of the top.
Yeah, exactly. But today, we are stripping all of that away. We're diving into this fascinating set of sources that examine the ancient scriptural archetypes of Noah and the Quranic concept of al-fulk.
Which traditionally translates to the ship.
Right, the ship. And the mission of our deep dive today is to translate these texts not as myth, but as a rigid, highly technical blueprint for understanding civilizational collapse and, well, a systemic reset.
It really is a massive paradigm shift when you read the primary material without all that cultural baggage.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we have this collective defense mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Where we just infantilize the past. I mean, if an ancient text describes the absolute mathematical certainty of a society destroying itself through greed, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it requires us to actually look in the mirror.
Exactly. So what do? We turn it into a magical fairy tale.
Mm.
But the sources we're unpacking today, they just absolutely refuse to let us do that.
They really do. They present this entirely rationalist, empirical framework.
Yes. They don't talk about, a wrathful deity throwing lightning bolts from the clouds. They talk about entrenched monopolies, the weaponization of language, and this is key, the architectural justice of a system that inevitably, mechanically purges its own corruption.
I want to stop right there on that phrase, architectural justice, because that really frames everything we are about to discuss today.
It's the core of it, yeah.
Because we are talking about natural laws. Like, if you build a skyscraper with shattered concrete, gravity doesn't punish the building out of anger, right?
And gravity just does what gravity does.
Exactly. The building falls because it violated the baseline laws of physics. And according to the texts we have, civilizations fall because they violate baseline ethical and sociological laws.
Yes, the structural math just fails.
Right. So if we are looking at this as a blueprint of a crash, where does the diagnostic process actually begin? Like, how does a society even know its foundation is cracking?
Well, the diagnostic process always begins with a warning. And to understand the warning, we really have to look at verses 26, 192 through 195 of the source text.
Okay.
That section outlines the concept of the universal transmission. And the text is very, very careful to distinguish this warning from standard human philosophy.
How so?
Because human philosophy is iterative, right? It's guesswork. It's essentially a group of people sitting in a room trying to figure out what works through trial and error.
Right, just throwing things at the wall.
Exactly. But the source material describes this transmission as a direct descent from the sovereign intelligence.
Okay, I have to push back a little here.
Sure.
Because when you say sovereign intelligence, my mind immediately goes back to that traditional image of a king sitting on a cloud.
Right, of course.
Isn't sovereign intelligence just, a secular rebranding of God to make it sound more palatable to a modern tech audience? Like, how do the sources actually differentiate this from standard religious tropes?
That is such a crucial distinction to make. The text isn't describing a localized entity with human emotions. It describes the primary administrator of existence.
The primary administrator. Okay.
Yeah, look at it through a systems theory lens. If the universe is a running system with gravity, thermodynamics, cellular biology, and they're all operating flawlessly, there is a core operating code that governs those natural laws.
Right, the baseline programming.
Exactly. And the source material argues that this same operating code extends to human sociology and ethics.
Oh, wow. So the physics and the ethics are essentially running on the same engine.
You nailed it. So the universal transmission isn't, a diary entry from a deity. It is the ultimate administrative diagnostic report. It's the baseline code of reality being downloaded directly to the human level.
And the mechanism of that download is so fascinating in these sources. The text talks about the trustworthy spirit bringing this transmission down.
Yes, traditionally translated as the angel Gabriel.
Right, but the source material from translator J.R. Ahmed provides a linguistic breakdown of the original Arabic that completely changes that visual for me. It doesn't describe a ghost or an angel at all.
No, it doesn't. If you look at the etymology, the ancient text uses words that modern readers often mistranslate, mostly due to these heavy medieval overlays.
So what are the actual roots?
Well, the root of the first word is RWH, and in its pure structural form, it signifies vital energy, or like a life-giving movement, breath, or wind.
Okay, so a dynamic force, not a person.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And the second root is AMN, which is the foundational root for security, reliability, and absolute trust.
So if we put that together, we aren't talking about a winged messenger coming out of the sky. We are talking about vital inspiration combined with a secure transmission,
Right. It represents a perfectly uncorrupted medium of delivery.
which is so important for the integrity of the data.
It is. Think of it as a perfectly encrypted end-to-end data pipeline from the sovereign intelligence to the human interface. The data packet cannot be intercepted, it cannot be hacked, and it cannot be distorted by the noise of the society it's entering.
Which brings us directly to the hardware receiving that encrypted pipeline, right? The human interface, the messenger.
Yes, the organic component.
And this is where the archetype of Noah gets completely dismantled. I mean, the source material explicitly states that Noah did not build a physical ark. There was no literal global flood, and he wasn't a carpenter.
Right, all those literal elements are stripped away.
Completely. In the framework of this text, Noah was essentially a crisis manager.
A crisis manager whose primary function is to recognize when a structural framework is no longer tenable, when the society is about to crash.
Right. And the sources point out an absolutely vital specification for this manager. The text calls him a man from among yourselves,
The Arabic phrase there is Rajulun Minkum.
Rajulun Minkum. And the source we are analyzing defines this specifically as the organic interface.
Yes.
I've been thinking about this organic interface concept a lot, actually. And the best way I can contextualize it for you listening right now is by comparing open source software to a proprietary operating system.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Because if a warning about systemic collapse is going to be effective, it can't be alien. It can't run on supercomputer hardware while everyone else in the society is using standard, buggy laptops.
It have to be compatible.
It has to run on the standard hardware of the human experience.
That's a highly accurate way to visualize it. I mean, why does the reformer have to be a normal human?
Right.
Because if an entity descended from the sky, let's say an angel made of pure light, to warn a society about economic monopolies and ethical decay, the society would be utterly mesmerized by the medium.
They just stare at the shiny angel.
Exactly. They would worship the angel, or they'd fear the angel, but they wouldn't process the actual data of the warning.
Or they would immediately use the messenger's supernatural nature as an excuse.
How do you mean?
They would say, well, of course you can perfectly execute this ethical code. You don't have a central nervous system. You don't get hungry. You don't have to pay rent. And you don't have, like, children to protect.
Oh, absolutely.
They'd just say, your code doesn't work on our hardware.
And that excuse is the ultimate shield against reform. Therefore, the organic interface is a strict systemic requirement.
It has to be one of us.
It has to be. The reformer must share the biology, the local demographic, and the exact language of the people. They have to be subjected to the exact same economic pressures, physical vulnerabilities, and social anxieties as everyone else.
So by operating as an organic interface, the reformer basically proves that the blueprint for survival is fully executable by a regular human being in that specific corrupted environment.
Yes, it proves the math works.
It makes the choice of an ordinary, flawed human messenger a feature of the system, not a bug.
Right.
But there is a detail in the sources about exactly where this secure transmission lands that I found incredibly striking.
The internal core.
Yeah, it doesn't just fall into the crisis manager's lap as a completed textbook. The text says the transmission descends upon the internal core. The word is kolbika.
That is a critical sociological mechanism in these texts. The root QLB literally means to turn over, to transform, or to undergo an inversion.
An inversion.
Right. In the context of human psychology within these texts, it represents the central seat of intellect, intent, and cognitive processing. It is the deepest part of the mind where objective knowledge is integrated into subjective reality.
But why is that distinction so important? Like, why does it matter that the code hits the internal core before the crisis manager ever opens their mouth to warn the public?
Because if the objective reality of the incoming crash isn't fully, violently integrated into the reformer's own mind, they cannot effectively manage the crisis.
They wouldn't have the conviction.
Exactly. If the knowledge is merely superficial, they are just parroting a script. They become, a politician reading from a teleprompter.
And people see right through that.
They do. You cannot lead a hostile, panicked community through a total systemic liquidation if you haven't internalized the absolute mathematical reality of the crash yourself.
So the crisis manager has to implicitly believe the structural math.
They have to know the building is going to fall, even while everyone else is dancing on the roof.
Wow. And that structural math relies entirely on the code it's written in. I mean, if the organic interface is the hardware, the language used to deliver the warning is the software code.
Yes, the linguistic framework.
But as we see in our own society today, language is constantly under attack. Words lose their meaning, definitions get blurred, which is why the source material places such a massive emphasis on precision, right?
It really does. The text introduces the necessity of what it calls a clear Arabic tongue, or lisanin Arabian mubin.
Well,
And when we examine the etymology of these specific roots, it opens up a sociological concept that is much larger than just a regional dialect.
I was hoping we could dig into this because at first glance, clear Arabic tongue just sounds like a demographic identifier. Like it's just saying, oh, he spoke Arabic.
Right, but the breakdown of those roots tells a completely different story.
Let's hear it.
Well, the ancient language operates on functional roots. LSN refers to the physical tongue, yes, but functionally it means a tool of communication.
Okay.
The root FIB does not inherently mean the ethnic group of Arabs. Functionally, it means to be clear, eloquent, and fundamentally free from defects or ambiguity.
Free from defects, that's a big
It's
difference.
huge. And the final root, BYN, means to separate, to clarify, and to make distinct.
So it isn't just a cultural identifier at all. It signifies a perfectly transparent, defect-free linguistic framework designed to violently separate truth from falsehood.
Precisely. And the sociological necessity of this simply cannot be overstated.
Because ambiguity is dangerous.
Exactly. If you are delivering a warning that threatens the power structures of a society, the language of that warning must be absolutely unambiguous. An unambiguous framework prevents the elite classes from manipulating the warning to exploit the public.
Let's ground this in our daily reality for a second, because we see the weaponization of ambiguous language everywhere right now.
Oh, constantly.
Think about the terms of service on a piece of software, or a modern legislative bill, or a corporate PR apology. The language is intentionally dense, sprawling, and filled with jargon.
It's designed to be a maze.
The complexity is the point.
Right. If a legal or moral code is ambiguous, the people who have the money to hire the best interpreters, the lawyers, the spin doctors, they can define the terms of justice however they see fit.
They find the loopholes.
Always. So a transparent, precise, defect-free language is the ultimate democratizing force. It ensures that the warning of consequence is communicated with absolute, undeniable clarity to the farmer and the king equally.
It eliminates the space where semantic distortion can survive.
Exactly.
Okay, so if precision is the goal and it threatens the established power structure, that immediately makes me think about the people who benefit from things being messy. Like, does the source material account for the people whose entire job is to distort reality?
It does, actually.
Yeah.
And it introduces them as the primary antagonist to the organic interface. The sources call them the fabricators of narrative.
The fabricators of narrative.
Yes. The Arabic word used is al-shu'aru, which historically translates to the poets.
Wait, the poets? Like guys sitting around with lutes writing sonnets about trees. That feels like a very strange villain for a story about civilizational collapse.
You really have to remove the modern romanticized notion of a poet here.
Okay.
In the ancient world, especially in the context of these sociological texts, poets were not just writing lovely verses, they were the PR firms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were the political strategists, the propagandists, and the media manipulators of their time. They were the ones who built influence not through empirical data, but through emotional rhetoric, superficial aesthetics, and totally unverified claims.
So they were the algorithm.
Yes.
They were the ones optimizing for engagement over truth.
That is an exact parallel, and the text redefines these fabricators in a way that is incredibly chillingly modern.
What does it say?
It states that deceptive, rebellious impulses naturally gravitate toward these habitual liars.
Yeah.
Their defining characteristic is that their performative speech completely disconnects from their physical actions. The text literally says They say what they do not do.
The disconnect between the brand and the reality.
Exactly.
It's the influencer promoting a wellness lifestyle while secretly suffering from a breakdown. It's the politician preaching family values while engaging in corruption behind closed doors.
And hypocrisy is structural.
It's the corporation running a multi-million-dollar greenwashing ad campaign while dumping toxic waste into a river. The source is identifying the exact mechanism of hypocrisy. But what I find even more terrifying is how the text describes the public's reaction to these fabricators.
The psychological effect on the masses is devastating. The text describes the followers of these fabricators as wandering aimlessly in every valley.
Wandering aimlessly.
Yes. The Arabic phrase is fikuli wadn yahimun. Again, the roots are vital here. WDY refers to a physical valley, the depression in the earth. And HYM means to wander without a destination, specifically driven by intense thirst, delirium, or profound confusion.
Wandering aimlessly in disorientation, driven by intense thirst. I want you, listening at home right now, to really think about your own daily habits for a second.
A sobering thought.
Think about the endless scrolling, the 24/7 news cycles designed to enrage you, the deep fakes, the algorithmic feeds that serve up constant outrage. Aren't we all currently wandering aimlessly in a valley of disorientation?
We absolutely are.
We are thirsty for actual truth, for meaning, but we are just wandering from one manufactured emotional peak to the next.
It is arguably the defining condition of our modern age. We are experiencing an intense societal thirst, but we are just wandering through valleys of manufactured narrative.
It's so bleak.
But accurate. The source material is arguing that the battle for society's survival is not initially fought with weapons. It is fundamentally a battle of semantics and attention.
Right. Whoever controls the narrative controls the reality.
Yes, the fabricators steer the unanchored masses away from empirical facts and objective reality, replacing it with emotional trends and tribal outrage.
And a society that lacks a stable moral framework is incredibly easy to sweep up in these detractions. So we have the crisis manager, the organic interface, delivering a perfectly clear, unambiguous warning based on the physics of systemic collapse.
Right.
And on the other side, we have the fabricators of narrative throwing up this massive smokescreen of emotional disorientation. But surely, if the math is undeniable, someone in power would eventually look at the diagnostic report and say, hey, we need to fix this. Like, why doesn't the society just correct its course?
Because clarity is an existential threat to the people profiting from the imbalance, which introduces the structural immune system of the corrupt society.
The structural immune system.
Yes. When the precise linguistic warning is issued, it inevitably hits a massive structural brick wall.
And that wall is what the text called the elite. The Arabic term is al-mala.
Correct.
I want to make sure we define this properly because elite is a very loaded word today. It gets thrown around in political debates to mean basically anyone you disagree with who happens to have a college degree. How does the text actually define them?
The text defines al-Malan not merely as people in leadership roles, but structurally as a board of directors hoarding monopoly.
Board of directors. Okay.
They are the entrenched establishment. They are the individuals and institutions that disproportionately benefit from the corrupted status quo.
Right.
Because the system is currently broken in their favor, they are structurally incentivized to actively oppose transparent reform.
So it isn't necessarily that there are cartoon villains twirling their mustaches. It's that their entire existence, their wealth, their power, relies on the structural imbalance. And to protect those monopolies, the source material says they deploy this fascinating psychological defense mechanism. The text explores the filter of cultural prejudice in verses 26, 1, 96 to 2, 0, 3.
Yes, this is a brilliant section.
It poses a hypothetical, right? What if the exact same empirical truth, the exact same warning, arrived through a foreign medium? What if it was delivered by someone of a different language, a different ethnicity, or a lower social class?
The text asserts that even if the data was completely flawless, the entrenched arrogance of the elite would guarantee its rejection.
They wouldn't even look at the math.
Nope. They would look at the source, a foreigner, a poor person, someone outside their sanctioned network, and just dismiss the data entirely.
But we do this all the time. I mean, think about how often a perfectly accurate, deeply researched piece of journalism is entirely dismissed by half the population simply because of the logo at the top of the website.
Exactly.
People say, oh, that's from that network. I don't need to read the data. I already know it's false. The source material is basically describing tribal epistemology.
And it describes the mechanical consequence of that tribalism. The text says that this rejection This persistent cultural prejudice physically occupies their internal cores.
It changes their brain.
Yes, it is a mechanical result of persistent denial. The human mind, when it continually chooses pride over empirical data, becomes permanently structurally closed. They literally lose the capacity to perceive objective reality.
They become structurally blind.
Yes.
And because they are blind, but still need to defend their monopolies against the clear warning, they resort to the oldest trick in the book. The texts call it manifest disorientation, or al-fulk, which is basically the ancient equivalent of institutional gaslighting.
Exactly. The elite project their own dysfunction onto the messenger.
Right.
When Noah, operating as the crisis manager, presents the undeniable mathematical proof of the impending collapse, the elite don't debate the math. They look at him and say, "We see you in manifest disorientation."
They label objective truth as insanity.
They have to.
I am so fascinated by this. They have to call him insane. Because if the truth is sane, if the structural math of the collapse is correct, then their monopolies are criminal.
Exactly.
If he is sane, they have to give up their power. It's the friction of a massive stage. This is the intense social heat generated when an entrenched establishment clashes with a clear, uncorrupted warning.
It creates a massive societal friction.
And the sources use a very specific, deeply revealing word for these establishment figures. They call them the architects of imbalance, or al-mujrimin.
The linguistic analysis of this word is honestly one of the most profound parts of the source material.
Let's break it down.
The root of al-mujrimin is JRM. In its physical agricultural sense, it means to cut off or to harvest prematurely.
Harvest prematurely.
Yes. Sociologically, it means committing an offense that severs an individual or an institution from social harmony.
Harvesting prematurely. I want to pause and just let you, the listener, sit with that phrase for a second. Because according to the logic of the source material, this maps perfectly onto modern economic behaviors.
It really does. It's uncanny.
Think about modern quarterly earnings reports. You have these massive corporations gutting their own long-term sustainability, laying off thousands of essential workers, stripping safety protocols, and just ignoring environmental degradation.
All for the short term.
Exactly. Why do they do it? All just to harvest a premature profit for the next shareholder meeting? They are literally eating the seed corn to look rich today, guaranteeing they will starve tomorrow. It is the exact mechanical definition of JRM.
And the sources argue that by engaging in this premature harvesting, by prioritizing short-term extraction over long-term equilibrium, the architects of imbalance cut themselves off from the natural order.
They sever their own roots.
Right. Their internal cores become permanently closed off to empirical facts. The tragic irony, and really the genius of this sociological blueprint, is that the very tools the elite use to maintain their power, the cultural prejudice, the gaslighting, the monopolies, are the exact mechanisms that blind them to the incoming crisis.
It's an incredible paradox. The institutions that privilege cultural pride and short-term profit over empirical data are actively engineering their own destruction.
Yes, they are.
They are building massive, sprawling castles directly on top of a major fault line, and when the geologists show up with the seismic data saying, hey, you need to evacuate, the elite look at the geologists and call them insane.
And because they refuse to change the foundation and they actively gaslight the reformers, the impending crash moves from a possibility to a mathematical certainty.
The math is locked in.
The friction reaches a critical mass. The structural decay simply cannot be reversed.
Which brings us to the pivotal moment. The system is rigged. The language is corrupted by the fabricators. The elite are completely blind and hostile. So what do you do?
Right. What's the survival strategy?
Yeah, if you are the crisis manager, or if you are someone who sees the data and understands the crash is coming, how do you survive?
Right.
And this is where we completely redefine the most famous part of the myth, constructing the ark.
The term is al-fulk. And as we established at the beginning of the deep dive, it is not a wooden vessel coated in pitch.
No animals 2x2.
None of that. It is a highly disciplined, structurally protected, closely knit community framework. It is a social algorithm designed specifically to withstand a systemic crash.
So how do you build this framework? How do you build a parallel society today? If the elite control the resources, the banks, and the supply chains, and the fabricators of narrative control the media and the algorithms, how does the organic interface protect the aligned community?
The sources give us two foundational leadership requirements for constructing this arc.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first concept is a stunning metaphor. Lower your wing. The Arabic is wakfi janaka.
Lower your wing.
It's a metaphor drawn directly from the physical act of a bird lowering its wing to shield its young from a storm or a predator.
Oh, wow.
In terms of sociological leadership and community building, it dictates a posture of profound, radical empathy. It means providing absolute safety, care, and humble support to the vulnerable individuals within the movement.
It's the creation of internal cohesion. And it
Yes.
makes perfect sense from a survival standpoint. If the external society is collapsing into chaotic friction, the internal framework of the survival group has to be built on radical compassion.
It's the only way it holds together.
Right. You cannot survive a systemic crash if the people inside the lifeboat are ruthlessly exploiting each other.
Yeah.
If your parallel community is just a micro version of the elite's predatory capitalism, your arc is going to sink.
Precisely. The internal structure must be the absolute antithesis of the external corruption. But that compassion is only half of the architecture.
Because you need defense.
Right. A bird cannot just lower its wing. It also has to have a beak and talons to defend the nest.
Mhm.
The second concept is what makes the arc truly functional and insulated.
What is it?
It is strategic disassociation, or boreon.
This is where it gets incredibly strict, doesn't it?
Very strict.
The text says that if the followers disobey the ethical baseline, if they start importing the corruption of the elite into the arc, the leader must explicitly say, "Indeed, I am entirely disassociated from what you do."
Yes. The root BR means to cut off, clear, or be absolutely free from an obligation or association.
The brilliance here is the sociological balance. You have profound, nurturing compassion for the in-group, lowering the wing, combined with an absolutely ruthless, impermeable ethical boundary against the out-group's corruption, which is strategic disassociation.
It creates a perfect membrane.
Right. The leader and the community, by extension, must entirely sever their trajectory from any ethical violation. They cannot compromise to maintain personal or systemic integrity.
And this dual posture, empathy inside, strict boundaries outside, is what physically constructs the arc's insulation.
But I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
I want to pose a challenge to you, and really to the listener trying to apply this blueprint today. How is strategic disassociation actually practical in a hyper-connected, modern, global economy?
Extremely difficult.
Is it even possible to build an insulated arc when the elite's monopolies control the very water we are swimming in? I mean, Amazon runs the servers, massive conglomerates run the global food supply, a handful of banks control the currency. How do you strategically disassociate from the grid?
It is the ultimate modern dilemma, and it's where the blueprint requires really deep critical thinking. The text doesn't suggest that disassociation means moving to a cave in the woods and pretending the world doesn't exist.
Okay, so it's not about isolating in a bunker.
No, it means a total structural and ethical separation from harmful actions. It's about building parallel systems of trust. If you are entirely reliant on a corrupted monopoly for your survival, you are a passenger on their sinking ship.
So what does disassociation look like in practice?
Strategic disassociation today means localizing your supply chains where possible. It means relying on community-supported agriculture instead of mega corporations. It means establishing mutual aid networks so that when the social safety net fails, your community has its own internal net.
So it's about systematically reducing your dependencies on the fragile, corrupted systems. You have to yield entirely to the natural order instead.
Yes. The sources call these people al-sajidin, which is traditionally translated as those who prostrate.
Right, a religious posture.
But functionally in this context, it translates to those who willingly align their actions, intellect, and lifestyle with the universal laws of justice and nature. You build the arc by aligning with physical, empirical reality rather than the manufactured narrative of the fabricators.
And you must reject rival, corrupt authorities. The text warns that compromising the singular baseline of justice invites inevitable social friction.
You can't serve two masters.
You cannot have one foot in the arc and one foot in the elite's boardroom. You can't say you are building a resilient, ethical community while your retirement fund is heavily invested in the very companies harvesting prematurely. The structural integrity of the arc relies on zero tolerance for systemic corruption.
Exactly. The boundary has to be absolute.
Okay, so the framework is built. The arc of disciplined community has been quietly constructed. The warnings have been given, and they have been completely ignored. The elite have gaslit the reformers, calling them insane.
Yep.
The fabricators are distracting the masses with endless algorithmic disorientation. Now comes the inevitable mechanical result of prolonged imbalance: the flood.
But before the floodwaters rise, before the final collapse, There is a fascinating, deeply psychological moment described in verses 26, 204 to 213.
What happens?
It is a phenomenon we see in every major collapse throughout history. It's called the illusion of delay.
I love this part of the source material because it is so incredibly human. As the natural consequences of the corruption finally begin to manifest, as the fault lines crack, as the economy starts to free fall, the previously arrogant elite who spent years mocking the warning suddenly desperately beg for more time.
They do. They ask, can we be granted a delay?
It exposes the sheer absurdity and fragility of their position. I mean, for years, they demanded to hasten the crisis. They mocked the organic interface, saying, if this crash is real, bring it on, show us the punishment.
Taunting the math.
Right. But the precise moment the structural failure begins pancaking, they realize a terrifying truth. Their temporary material enjoyment, their hoarded resources, and their prolonged wealth offers zero structural protection when the final accounting arrives.
Absolutely zero.
I can't help but draw a parallel here to the financial crises we've seen in our own lifetimes. Think about how massive financial institutions behave when a bubble bursts.
Oh, it's identical.
For years, they mocked the regulations, they took wild risks, they harvested prematurely. But the second the market crashes, what do? They go to the government and ask for a delay. They ask for a bailout.
They want more time.
They try to print money or tweak interest rates or pass emergency legislation to seek a delay. They are desperately trying to negotiate with gravity.
That is exactly the dynamic the text is describing.
Mhm.
They fail to realize that you cannot negotiate with a structurally unsound foundation. The system proves that wealth cannot bribe physics.
Right.
$1 billion in a bank account cannot stop a collapsing roof.
Yeah.
And the text asserts something crucial here regarding the fabricators of narrative. The rebellious, deceptive impulses al-Shayunu did not bring this destruction down, nor can they stop it.
Right. The text says that falsehood inherently lacks the capacity to engineer a sustainable framework. They are completely isolated from hearing the truth. The root SM means to perceive sound. The text says they are isolated from hearing. This doesn't mean they are deaf. It means their corrupt minds are literally, structurally incapable of processing the balanced laws of nature.
They've shut off the receptors.
They can only build illusions, and illusions can't hold up a building.
Which brings us to the true nature of the flood. In the context of this sociological blueprint, it is not water covering the globe.
Right, it's not a rainstorm.
The text uses two highly specific terms. First, al-ataba al-lalim, which translates functionally to a painful systemic collapse.
Painful systemic collapse.
And second, agraka, which signifies a systemic liquidation.
Systemic liquidation. I want that phrase to ring in your ears. The absolute dismantling of a society that became perceptually blind to objective data.
If we look at the mechanics of this collapse from an analytical perspective, it really is a thing of intellectual awe.
It is.
It is a self-purging mechanism. The chaotic friction generated by the society's own corruption is what eventually drowns it. The system wasn't destroyed by a wrathful deity throwing a tantrum.
It was dismantled by its own mathematical structural failure. This is the core concept of architectural justice we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive. No civilization is dismantled without first receiving a clear, rational warning.
The rules are always laid out first.
The organic interface provides the diagnostic test. The failure to heed the warning, the active gaslighting, and cultural prejudice is the structural decay. The flood is just the building finally pancaking in on itself.
And this leads to the final state of the corrupt system. The text uses a powerful phrase to describe the aftermath: terminal overturning. Makwalabin yankwalabun.
Terminal overturning.
Yes. The root QLB, which we saw earlier in the word for the internal core, means to turn upside down or reverse completely.
The corrupt structure literally flips onto its head, crushing the elite who built it. The weight of their own monopolies, the density of their own fabrications, it all inverts.
It literally reverses.
The floor becomes the ceiling, the safety mechanisms become traps, and the whole thing comes down.
It represents the inescapable historical reality that a civilization can only survive when its actions match its stated principles of justice.
Right.
When empty rhetoric, political spin, and the premature harvesting of resources destabilize public trust for too long, the terminal overturning is just a matter of time. The chaotic friction, the debt, the social unrest that is the floodwater, and it drowns the architects of imbalance.
And when the dust settles and the friction finally stops, the only thing left floating well is the arc.
The arc remains.
The protected societal framework. The individuals who maintained self-protective discipline, who lowered their wings in compassion for each other, and who strategically disassociated from the rot.
They are insulated from the systemic liquidation because their structure was built on reality.
Unlike the illusions of the elite.
Exactly. It was built on the clear, precise linguistic framework of truth, delivered by an organic interface who lived among them, and originating from the infallible code of the sovereign intelligence.
It is a stunning, razor-sharp sociological blueprint. I mean, when you look at it through this lens, we've moved so far away from the childhood myths of wooden boats and literal floods.
Worlds away.
What we actually have in these ancient texts is a manual, a survival guide for identifying systemic rot, recognizing the manipulation of language by the algorithms and PR firms, and understanding the absolute non-negotiable necessity of building disciplined community frameworks before the crash happens.
It strips away all the magical thinking and leaves us with absolute objective causality. The system purges its own corruption. The universal source reestablishes the clean slate, allowing humanity to try again, hopefully having learned from the math of the collapse.
And so we return to the silence after the storm, the clean slate. As we wrap up this deep dive into the blueprint of the crash, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day.
A very necessary thought.
The sources tell us that the flood is not a historical anomaly. It is the inevitable mathematical result of a society becoming perceptually blind to objective truth. Look around at the fabricators of narrative in your own life today.
They are everywhere.
The algorithms designed to keep you angry, the political spin doctors, the endless disorientation of your social feeds. If the water levels of disorientation are rising, and the Ark is not a boat, but a tightly bound community based on absolute truth and radical empathy who is currently in your Ark, and is your social framework strong enough to survive the crash?